that any political settlement of Kashmir, which may or may not happen, might take. I don't know by what name we would call that, because at times there's talk of, say, an independent state, and then everyone says that's not possible. Pakistan wouldn't like that. India wouldn't like that. Then there's talk of, what is with India stays with India, what is with Pakistan stays with Pakistan. Some Kashmiris don't like that. Some are fine with it. There's a multiplicity of opinions, but largely in the valley, the dominant slogan is that of Azadi, which means freedom. But when I was 16, I knew absolutely what that meant, but I'm not 16 anymore. And it's hard to be sure about a lot of things. But what I am sure about is, living in the valley, in Srinagar and everywhere else, I traveled there as a reporter. What people definitely want and are more clear on than on anything else is an end to the status quo. It's a difficult way to live. If you have had a continuous conflict for 20 years, the levels of violence can go up and down. But situations like that totally damage a society. The cost. I said what we are really clear about is that, the cost has been high, very, very high. I'm not into rhetoric, and I don't feel the need to score points. I'm sort of I'm neither. That's in a way, I don't have to take the positions that, a nationalist Indian or Pakistani would have to take on Kashmir. But that's something everyone is united on, is that there has to be an end to suffering. And the idea of whatever political solution comes, it should engage with what people feel and ensure that there's rule of law, there's a sense of justice. And that's really it. I don't know by what name they would call whatever comes up, if it ever comes up.
Press anything? Do I? Basharat, my question for you is that from most Kashmiris in the valley, how do they identify themselves, their main ideology? Do they think of themselves as Muslims first, as Kashmiris first? Have you seen a difference in the last couple of years? You said that these Muslim groups from across the border, you say, are less evident in the last few years. I'm a politician, so my words are measured. So since those groups are no longer so prevalent, what is the identity of the people in the valley?
Well, the identity has always been and is and will remain is Kashmiri first. See, and there are reasons for that. Everyone, has an ethnic identity. We all have multiple identities. But because it's a place that has been in turmoil for so long, and it's also a space which is kind of, surrounded by mountains. And it's very different culturally from both India and Pakistan in many ways. From Delhi, from Karachi, it's nothing like this. And that sort of closeness, that being enclosed by the mountains and this intense conflict, it's always made that identity the foremost identity. So the most natural thing for me to introduce myself as is Kashmiri, and then whatever other identities I might come up with depend on, what's the best option in that situation.
The question of, yes, please go ahead.
Basharat, let's move from politics to literature. And how major a role is literature playing in the Kashmiri aspect of changes of multiple types? Sure. So if I may say, I read the book as and when it was published. So I want to refer to Agha Shahid Ali, possibly the greatest Kashmiri poet of the century. And he find his feeling understanding of Kashmir has been decimated. He called it the country without a post office. How far do you think that the literary writers, poets, I don't know enough about it, have you traveled? Where has your journey taken you from Shahid Ali's creative verse to what you are now and where you are now?
Sure, no, I would. That's an important question and something I love talking about. Well, I mean, it's true as of with all societies that we all want to tell our stories, but one of the sort of major books on Kashmir in the conflict, there was all kinds of characters who came to Kashmir, people who never came to Kashmir, and like from universities, academics, political scientists. So there was a wave of books explaining Kashmir from different political positions. But in terms of literary writing, the first major literary event that in a way put Kashmir on the map was this Kashmiri American poet, Agha Shahid Ali. He was raised in Kashmir and then studied in Delhi, went to New York, and taught at Amherst. And among other people who he taught was Kamila Shamsi. So Shahid's work it dealt with the troubles in Kashmir in a very serious way. But he was also sort of a great poet and wrote in English. And this engagement of, with the politics of the place, with the trauma of the place, we had seen nothing like that when the collection first appeared in 97 and 98. So instantly, the influence Shahid has had on a whole generation of young people there cannot be quantified. I mean, in some ways, people like me might not be writing today had it not been for Shahid's poems. Because you suddenly read a beautifully done poem and you see everything that had happened around you in that one moment. I mean, the title for my book comes from there, from one of his poems. But what has happened after that is that, I was 13 in 1990, and it took us time to grow up. I mean, you need the time. That's the nature of the world. So there's a whole generation who's now in their mid-30s that basically, saw what happened in Kashmir, went out or stayed on, but essentially had to train themselves. Even if I feel very intensely about a subject, I couldn't just say in 93 that I will write a book. So it took the years that it took. And there's a wonderful and brilliant new novel that just came out last week by a friend from Srinagar, a man called Mirza Wahid, who's an editor at BBC Urdu service. And it's a novel called The Collaborator, published by Penguin. And no, I mean, even if I had never met the man, I mean, I was really moved by the quality of writing, by the sheer brilliance of how he deals with Kashmir. And since I read the section about LOC, the whole novel is set on LOC and really explores power and what happens, when dirty wars like that go on. And there's more people who are working. There's a film that just came out. It's called Harud. Harud is the Kashmiri word for autumn, and by a filmmaker called Amir Bashir. So there is a new generation that's working, and I'm very, very happy about that.
Thank you. We have only 5 minutes to go, and this will probably be the last two questions. Jeet, please go ahead.
Basharat, thank you for sharing that lovely passage with us, and I look forward to reading the book. You've been described as a journalist, but then I see so much literature that seems to have crept into your writing, the way you describe moments. And I think increasingly what journalists are finding is that the way to describe conflict is so much more evocative when you look at the ordinary things. I wanted to know what has influenced your writing to make you want to go beyond simply a journalist's point of view when looking at a situation. And this is not just as you being Kashmiri, but in your, as you have learned, as you have gone to school and college, what have you been influenced by that has made you want to write the way you do?
Well, I think, that's one of the I insist on being identified as a journalist, but I think it's a very narrow definition of journalism. We often think of newspaper journalism of a certain kind. I won't take the names of some papers as being the way you can do journalism. I mean, there is like serious intellectual and literary journalism, which you can also call non-fiction, where one can go beyond, 5 killed and 7 injured. And that's exactly what forced me to, because I was doing the daily reporting on Kashmir. Like, another guy shot, another guy killed. So, I mean, one did that on automatic. Like, you did that in 15 minutes. You filed a report, you wrote a piece for a magazine. It's one day's work, it's done. And that's after 2 days, you don't even look at it yourself. But there's this whole process of when you are reporting in a place, there's a lot that you feel and there's a lot that you see. So in a way, is to use reportage as a tool to convey that. I mean, you just feel that, the newspaper or the news magazine is a very limited medium. It serves a certain purpose. It's important. It's bread and butter. But after you have done that, you want to convey like a multidimensional, experience, not just the event, but also the context and the texture. And we all, borrowed those techniques from the novel. I mean, but this is a tradition of nonfiction writing that's an old one. I mean, there are examples of travel writing in England, and there's the new nonfiction in America from Tom Wolfe on Michael Hare, there's Kapuscinski. So yes, I was reading whatever books I could read, and George Orwell, yes.
The last question, Shahid, Nadeem, ji, please. Microphone, please. Excuse me, here, Shahid, sorry, we are out of time. Ji. I know everyone has come here to listen to the moderator making his concluding remarks, so...
Right, I'm one of them
I
as
speak for about 45 minutes.
Well, I'm Shahid Nadeem. I was born in Sopur, so I was a baby when I was carried to Pakistan by a prisoner who was being exchanged along with my mother. I have visited Kashmir a few times, and I've realized that there has always been a very strong tradition, a Sufi tradition, a tradition of peace and communal harmony, and Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims living together, sharing the culture and the identity, and being very proud of their Kashmiriyat. And during the Zia era and during the 80s and 90s, it was deliberately, they tried to destroy that by deliberate attacks on Kashmiri Pandits and Sikhs. I wanted to know, has that Kashmiriyat and that Sufi and tradition of peace, has it come back, or are there signs of being revived, that great Kashmiri tradition of peace and love and harmony?
Well, I mean, yeah, we have the shrines and we have the festivals, but I don't think, politics is done like that. And I find it extremely problematic, this whole Kashmir is Sufi, Kashmir is not Sufi. I mean, there are Sufis who actually were the first people to pick up a gun, but that was people who joined. I mean, even Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, you can describe him as coming actually from a Sufi tradition and then going into Jamaat. But I don't think that's my frame. That's not my frame at all. Yes, a big failure of the Kashmiri movement was that it could not respect dissent, and like most other violent conflicts. And many people who were seen as sympathetic to the Indian state, and many of them prominent members of the minority Pandit community were assassinated. And in fear, like more than 200,000 Kashmiri Pandits left their houses, and it's one of the biggest tragedies. But, a lot of those boys who pulled those triggers came from Sufi families. And, but these were political actions, political calculations. It wasn't an ideology, it wasn't kind of to throw in those loosely used words like Wahhabi ho gaya, Sufi ho gaya. No, Kashmir is the way it is. Even today, the most important religious and cultural center is Hazrat Bal. And you can call it a Sufi shrine. I just think of it as Hazrat Bal, and there's Dasgir Saab's shrine. But the battle is not a religious battle. It's a political struggle. That's what is going on. Religion was used as a tool to galvanize people, but in its essence, the culture hasn't changed.
Thank you. Basharat, this great tribute to the physical and spiritual beauty of Kashmir, the complexity of Kashmir is summed up on page 98. He quotes Agha Shahid Ali, the late poet, and in just 9 lines, Agha Shahid attempts to spell Kashmir in about 17 different ways. And I think symbolically that's those 17 different ways simply to spell the word Kashmir in English, and ending with this charmingly English version of Kashmir, which is Kashmir. Beautiful. And then the way he began this book, it's literature. It begins with a very humble line, I was born in winter in Kashmir. And then for the next 3 pages, it is an absolutely engaging advent into literature. Well, before I conclude, I just want to say, take this opportunity, I see an innocent man here, Umar, who I was very intemperate with yesterday at your session. I apologize if I was unduly aggressive. Sometimes that aggression is part of the Pakistani psyche, and we want, wherever we see an Indian, we want to be a little aggressive. So I was intemperate, and apologies for that. But thank you very much for coming and for applauding this young man. Go out and buy his book. Thank you.